Next comincia oggi con Elsbeth e Geldhof, però continuerà con almeno altri quattro invitati, ospiti invitati nel prossimo anno, quindi nel secondo semestre accademico. Lei è la prima di questo ciclo, è stata invitata grazie a Lisa Sartini, che l'ha conosciuta a Cairo un anno fa, e poi forse vi siete rivisti da qualche altra parte. No, solo conosciuti a Cairo. E quindi Lisa ha organizzato tutto questo, quindi è riuscita a portarla qui, anche grazie all'Associazione Volo, quindi ai fondi dell'Associazione Volo. E Elsbeth si è formata in Olanda, quindi è una formazione olandese, ha fatto il master a Maastricht e poi adesso è uno studioso indipendente, ha collaborato a vari progetti a UCLA, nel Museo Nazionale di Leiden, con il Fitzwilliam Museum, e oggi ci parlerà non è un'egittologa, quindi lei mi ha precisato che non è un'egittologa, però ovviamente essendo una restauratrice e conservatrice, lavorando soprattutto sui pigmenti, sulle pitture, ovviamente l'Egitto è uno dei suoi campi privilegiati e ultimamente grazie al progetto con il Fitzwilliam Museum in cui stanno lavorando ai sarcofagi, stanno facendo un progetto per la pubblicazione di tutti i sarcofagi che sono al Fitzwilliam Museum, si è trovata a lavorare nell'ultimo periodo specialmente con materiale egittologico, quindi sarà questa specie di crossover, oggi facciamo metà restauro, metà egittologia. La lezione, la conferenza durerà 45 minuti, cercherà di parlare piano in inglese, quindi in modo che tutti quanti possiate seguirla. Se alla fine ci saranno 10 minuti per domande, se avete delle domande fate, se non volete farle in inglese potete farle in italiano, cerchiamo di tradurle in qualche modo. Se no, altrimenti se siete troppo timidi, quando ha finito potete approcciarla singolarmente e fare tutte le domande possibili del caso. Io lascio la parola a lei e... Prego.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Can everybody hear me if I speak like this? If I don't speak at fast? As you know by now, after this introduction, I am a conservator of historic paint, so mainly dealing with painted objects, conserving them, preserving them, restoring them, but also researching them. And I work on painted objects from a European context, but also from non-European areas. And for the past 8 years, I've been working primarily on ancient Egyptian objects and in particular coffins. So you will see a lot of coffins coming in the next 45 minutes. I want to start with a project that I was involved in 2011-2014 at the Rijksmuseum van Oudheden, the National Museum of Antiquities in Leiden, in the Netherlands. And at the time they were starting a collaboration with the Vatican Museums and the Louvre in Paris, which is the Vatican Coffin Project. And that was at the time mainly focusing on their collection of coffin sets from First Dynasty coffin sets from the Baba Gazous period. And this was a project where we did research of those coffin sets in collaboration with conservation scientists and with Egyptologists and with other specialists. So it was really a collaborative team, and we made an exhibition where the conservation of those coffins were a big part of it, and it was actually quite new to me to do conservation so exposed in the middle of an exhibition, and you can see it here. I was working with a team of 4 conservators in the middle of the exhibition. The coffins were out in the open. visitors could really connect to them. This was really, and see what was happening. And we did this project mainly to try to understand the coffins from not only Egyptological sense, not only from iconography, or whatever happened to the owners of these coffins and how these people are related, which is maybe your field as Egyptologist. But we also try to understand these coffin sets and this huge amount of material, huge amount of objects, from the angle of their materials, what are they made of, and their manufacture techniques, how do people make them, their painting techniques, because these are 21st dynasty coffins. They have an enormous amount of paintwork on them, as you might know, which is typical for this type of coffins. How, also the techniques of applying the paints and making those decorations, how did that work? And also the decoration sequences for these particular coffins were reused. They went over from one owner to another, and those coffins were adapted and partly redecorated. And how did that work? And that also got into the more anthropological side of it, which was the biography of the object. Because these particular coffins from Baba Ghazoos were excavated in 1891, fairly recent, and came almost immediately, 2 years later, to the museum, and then had a whole life, over only a century, but a whole life after their, in a whole museum life, where all sorts of things were happening. So we get into the restoration history, which is also part of the context of these objects. So it's not only it's now a museum object, and how, what can we tell from, how can we research that? And it was also during this project that I started doing little experiments with painting materials and painting tools, in order to help me and the whole team and everybody understanding these particular coffins a little bit better from a different angle. So making reconstructions and trying out different things with paints and pigments and brushes can basically be seen as a form of experimental archaeology. And I see experimental archaeology for the paint side as a study of material handling, a study of the painting tools, the painting technique, a study of manufacturing techniques, how were those tools actually made, how were pigments made, and a study of the effects of time and events. And that is the conservation and the preservation part of it. Because we all know, I'm sure you all know, that when coffins come, or whatever from ancient Egypt comes out of the ground and is excavated, and very often very nicely painted, you might think, oh, this is exactly how it was made. It is as if it was made yesterday. In the coming presentation, I will focus on how things do look when they were made sort of yesterday, and how it is compared to what we see on those on the objects. Because the effects of time are, of course, there. Materials are not always stable; they age over time, and also the external events have leave their marks on these objects. Only the touching and the handling of those objects during excavation, but quite often immediately after excavation. All sorts of things are people always want to do things. People always want to care for things. So also sort of things are happening to those objects after their discovery, and of course the other events like fires in tombs or water damage or all sorts of changes leave their marks. So in Leiden, during that project, I was starting a little bit with experiments, and after that project, I started working for the Swimming Museum. I was involved in a really nice project there, where I could really focus on the making of reconstructions and this part of the experimental archaeology. This is one of the little paint trials I did tests with Egyptian blues, Egyptian greens, malachite, which is another green pigment sometimes found on objects, on a piece of cedar wood, and to the left you see a yellow paint layer underneath all those trials. And that was based on, that was a trial that I made for a reconstruction that I would eventually make of 4 coffins. In this case, it's a Middle Kingdom coffin that belonged to a woman named Nacht, which is in the collection of Cambridge. And they ended up, those reconstructions ended up in an exhibition also. This was the Deaf on the Nile show, which ran in 2016 at the Fitzwilliam Museum. And again, this exhibition also had a conservation studio as part of the exhibition. And next to the conservation studio were these 4 reconstructions that you can see here. You see the coffin of the reconstruction of a corner of the Middle Kingdom coffin. And then in the middle you see part of a lid, lids of a 21st dynasty and a 26th dynasty coffin, and all the way to the right a section of a shroud mummy with mummy portraits. And as this was part of the exhibition and next to a conservation conservation studio in the exhibition, you could ask yourself, why do conservators actually make reconstructions? Why, isn't preserving and researching the coffins, isn't that enough to deal with? Why do I, as a conservator, actually make reconstructions? Well, it is actually because to a very modern idea of what conservation actually is, we see conservation as the careful management of change. Because these objects, even when they are in a controlled environment of the museum, they still change and it still needs to be understood what those changes are. So we can preserve them for the generations after us. And that is, of course, part of my responsibility as a conservator. And then I come back to what I said earlier about the making of the reconstructions that can help with understanding those changes that the object goes through. I will now focus on the painting tools and the painting technique, because everybody knows what painting is. It's something with paint, it's something with brushes. Everybody knows what a painting is, and of course we've all done it. However, it's sometimes remarkably difficult to actually understand how a painting is made, what we actually see, because we think of something that we know is painting today. So here you see a fragment with half a cow. The cow is missing its head, I'm afraid. When we focus on the spots of the cow, we see a sort of paint remnants that are sort of dabbled on to make these spots of the cow. And you might think, oh, it's paint loss, or what actually has happened there. But if you look closely and you start trying to understand how this cow has been painted, we see that it's not a brush, but it's something like a textile or a combination of fibers, where sort of the paint is almost like sponging, is sort of applied to the surface to make this texture of the cow hide, the cow skin. And we see a little, in the corner, a little trial of the education officer of the Fitzwilliam Museum. This is somebody who runs all sorts of workshops for children and teenagers and all sorts of museum visitors. And she was trying just with paint and to see if she could do something with that technique, and it works. So something that isn't so obvious at first can help actually doing it can help you understand what it is you're seeing. And another, on the same coffee fragment, we see a deer. And this might be a little bit hard for you all to see because also the photo is not that sharp. So I apologize for that. But here we see a yellowish color on the to suggest the height of the deer. And in that yellowish color we see finger marks. And it's very difficult to see because it's quite light. But it's just, it's like finger marks. I'm trying to make the texture and trying to manipulate the paint while it's still wet with, the fingers to make a certain texture. So it's, it's very simple, but you only see it once you start trying to think about these things. And while I was at Fitzwilliam really looking at all these objects, trying to figure out what tools and what paint application methods were used, I realized that sometimes even when you think with all your experience, you think that you know for sure that a brush or a pen has been used, then by examining something more closely, all of a sudden I start, doubting myself again and thinking, well, is it actually really true what I thought? Is it really how's the situation? So this is a Shakti box, quite small, about 25 or 20 centimeters, and there's a really nice scene painted on this Shakti box, where we see a butt priest wearing a leopard skin, and the skin still has its tail and its head also. And when we focus on the head a little bit, this is really, really small. It's less than a square centimeter. And if you see it so big, you might not even recognize it as a head anymore. But so you see all these brush strokes, and you see the spots on the in black and in red on the leopard skin. And I hope you can see that the red spots are so these red spots all here are made different than the black spots, which are sort of two things together. So is that intentional, or is it something that is just an effect of a certain tool that they used? So when we start even magnifying a little bit more under the microscope, and this is a magnification of 60 times, we can see a lot more. We can see the individual pigments, all these yellow particles that you see everywhere. Is part of the yellow layer. It's a pigment called orpiment. We come to speak. I'll show you more orpiment later. And we see the red dots and the black dots a little bit better. And I would have thought that on such a small scale it would be done with a very small brush, although I couldn't really figure out how the black spots were done. And until I made a trial. Here you see my very poor attempt on the bottom. I tried pens and reed pens, and I tried brushes, and I finally think that it's being made with a pen, but I still don't exactly know. So I should do more tests to really understand it. Why do we even care if it's a brush or a pen, you might ask? Well, I come to that also in a moment. We do care because this is something that is pictorial and not text. And we associate a pen, the use of a pen, with scribes and with text. And we associate brushes with something that is more pictorial, or with vignettes, or with something that is with something that is not the field of the scribe. And as we will see later on, there is a lot, has been used a lot on coffins, on objects, on ancient Egyptian objects, not only for text. So that is why, at this moment, we cared for finding out what those tools are for the paint application. As I said in the beginning, I also made brushes and pens as well myself to actually use them on these trials and these reconstructions. And for making these brushes, I used examples that are in collections. And here we see a very nice presentation in the British Museum. When I photographed it, it was in the gallery where the Lebanon wall paintings were. And we see brushes, and we see a nice basket to hold the brushes. We see a paint box, and we see actually loads of pigments. And to focus on brushes a little bit more, here we see a small collection in the museum in Cairo. And you see several brushes tied together with rope. And when we focus on the ends of those brushes, we see that these particular brushes are made of sticks. They're made of wooden sticks, wooden pieces that are frayed out of it. And what we also can see is that apparently painters use one color per brush. And because we see different colors dispersed over these brushes. This is not to fray out the ends of the stick is not the only way to make a brush. There are also ways of making a brush by tying together all sorts of fibers, and that can have very different results. So this is one in the Petrie Museum in London. This is another one, also in the Petrie Museum. None of these have actual paint on them, to be honest. Here we see a very similar one, also in the Petrie. And here we see something that isn't ancient Egyptian at all, but does look very similar to the other brushes. This is actually in the Horniman Museum in London, in South London, and it's not from Egypt, but it's from Papua New Guinea. Completely different time, completely different color, same sort of brush, and this actually has paint on it. And also, as we look at yet a different culture, we see frayed out yucca leaves used by Native American tribe, Chumash, in the Natural History Museum in Santa Barbara. Again, I come to the same conclusion that painting and especially making brushes, it's not. It's a very simple technology in essence, in principle. It's a very simple technology. You use whatever you can use, either your hands or sticks, or modify those sticks, or whatever, tie it together. And it's a very simple technology. And it has been used over several of millennia of years, still making brushes like this, right? We find them in all sorts of cultures. But to come back to Egypt, these are the brushes from the British Museum again, more documentarily photographed. And here are my reconstructions of those brushes. So in these brushes, we see all three. We see frayed out wood. We see rope, thick rope that has been sort of untangled, and we see fibers tied together with a rope. And I made reconstructions of all of these. And for instance, for example, for the fiber brush, I just used remnants of material that I used of reed that I used for making the pens. And whatever of the reed husk or whatever fibers I had left, I used for making a brush. And I can imagine that if you are on site somewhere, in the middle of nowhere, or with not much around, that is how you make a brush. You make your pens and make your brush all from the same materials. And this is one of the brushes more close up. And eventually it ended in a whole arrangement of brushes, and I also have a few here for you to see later on. So once you have your brushes, you can actually use them. And you can see in a very systematic way, or not, what marks they can make. And so this is actually from a very long time ago, the brushes that are made. And the tests that we did to see what marks they make. And how can this help you to understand what we see in coffin decoration or in any painted decoration? How can this help? Trying out the brushes, trying out pens, and see what marks they make. Otherwise, then it's really fun to do. And but how can this help? Well, I try to give you an example of how I used it. The research of the decoration of certain elements on Molokhu's coffins. I was in Leiden at the time, and in particular the Hafer cow. There are a lot of cows on these coffins, and I like animals, so I thought I would focus on this. Here we see a Hafer cow on the outer coffin of a chantress called Procession, and here we see the same elements on her inner coffin. A lying down Hafer cow on the outer coffin of another chantress called Nesitana Lutawi, and a Hafer cow on an inner coffin of a woman named Janet Ben Heelmeffer, all in the collection of Leiden. All from the same cachet, and if we then compare the spots on the cows, and we compare it with all my tests from brushes, we can see that a stick brush, so several little sticks together used to make as a brush to make a mark, have been used on 3 cows. And the other cow, although it looks very, very similar, actually a different brush has been used. And you might still think, well, okay, and so what? What now? Well, if you try to figure out how these coffins were made, who decorated them, what the workshops were involved, was it all one person? Was it different workshops? Tools are very personal. You can do for a long time with your own tools. So if you can distinguish different brushes on coffins that are from the same area, from the same group of people, then that does actually tell us something about workshop methodology, and that does actually give us can give us more information about things other than the actual decoration of these coffins. So now we've talked for a long time about brushes, and we go on with the actual paint, because paint is made from pigments, which is basically ground up rocks, whatever you can find around you. And there are a lot of fancy grinding tools and pestle mortars in collection. I'm sure you will be very familiar with all these. Here we see just 2 very nice ones in the Fitzwilliam Museum and the British Museum. Again, this is not typical for ancient Egypt. We see here a stone mortar from a Native American tribe, a pestle mortar made out of stone with a lump of red ochre, also from another Native American tribe. This is far less fancy than what we've seen in burial grounds or so on. And it can even be more simple. This is a surface rock just outside in the open, where there are holes, there are hollowed out holes where you can grind whatever you want to grind in with a lodestone. So it works as a pestle and mortar. So once you've ground up your pigments, if you're lucky, you can use it right away. But very often, the actual colored material is mixed with sand and with impurities and material, because it's just rocks that you find wherever you source your. And then you need to do something more than after the grinding to actually make it into a workable paint. And one way of extracting the actual pigment, in this case yellow ochre, is by flotation or levitation. Levitation, actually, I made a spelling mistake here. Which is basically just pouring water over it. The heavy particles, like sand, they sink. The smaller particles and lighter particles, they float. And then if you decant it and do it again and again and again, and eventually wait till the water has evaporated and till everything has sunk, you get this variety of pigments that have a different color according to their and so you can separate the pigment from you can extract the pigment from the actual rock, and you can do it with whatever you find around you. So you get, for instance, if I've still keep it with yellow ochre, you get, according to the rock you use, this whole area of colors. And here is my palette while making reconstructions. So we see yellow ochre, Egyptian blue, which is a man-made pigment, not found in nature, but made by people themselves in kilns. Still needs to be crushed because it comes out rock hard of the kiln. Still needs to be ground up, and you can also separate all sorts of particles from the Egyptian blue that you make. Egyptian green, very related material, copper greens, red ochre, white, crushed up limestone basically, and black, which is crushed up charcoal or sorts of charred materials. So you start with rocks, and if you keep it out of the context of anything decorated, you end up with a pigment palette that is like this. This is very far from, if you just apply it as a paint, so you mix the pigment with a fine medium, and you apply it as a paint, you end up with a color palette like this, and it's all the tools and manipulation that you do with it, and the choices that craftsmen made for choosing their source material and for choosing their ways of manipulating those rocks, and choosing the tools, that makes the actual, that causes the differences in this painting decoration. And this is a stone relief with depictions of scribes and painters. Very difficult to photograph in Cairo, but I managed somehow. So here we see, I hope you can see, people with the brushes or the pens behind their ears, and a man is also holding something in his hands that is all the way on the right there. Holding something in his hand that holds the actual paint, and you might recognize it as a painting palette. So here's one with just, or paint holders, I should say. It's not always a palette, it's not a paint as we know it. It's something to hold the paint while you're doing it. Here you see something very similar to what was depicted on the stone relief, holding red and black. Here we see something different of a messier person, holding black, red, and also something white. So they changed paint during their career. Here we see a fancier one made of faience that actually holds remnants of Egyptian blue in it, but also other containers like shells, also found in an ancient Egyptian context, and a paint holder which is very, very straightforward. And then paint holders that I see a lot in collections, these stone ones that very often have an actual lid to close off the paint holder. One with 1 well, one with 5 wells. The one in the Fitzwilliam Museum also contains red earth paint. Another stone one in Cairo, and a nice decorated wooden one, also in Cairo. And of course, also these palettes that can also hold your brush or pens. And when we focus on this one a little bit more, we see the same pigment palette, funnily enough. So we see the yellow, red, white, black, and blue and green. And here a different one from a different collection. I mean, there are many. I'm sure you've seen them. That actually hold the pens. And something else, not made, just a container that can be found in nature, a large reed that also can contain, in this case, black ink to dip your pen in. I've never seen this anywhere else than in the Fitzwilliam Museum, so I'm curious if anybody else knows of that. And that brings me to the actual pens. So pens can be made from reeds. It's a reed that grows in the whole of Europe. So from North Africa to the north of Europe, a little bit in marshland or in rivers, the Juntus Maritimus. I sourced them myself from where I live. And these pens, you just use the hollow core, and you can use that as a, you can actually use them. It really works. And I know because I've done. And I'm not the only one who's done that. Here you see Susanna Molsar and another Egyptologist that I forgot the name of. Trying out these pens during a workshop. Susanna is trying out a pen along a straight edge for instance, for making marking outlines on a papyrus or on a coffin. And the gentleman here is writing enormous amounts of text. And this is how I want to focus a little bit on the use of pens, because pens are associated with text and with scribes and with people who can read and write. However, we see a lot of pens also on penmanship, the use of pens, on a lot of things that are not related to scribes at all. For instance, these wall paintings, the maiden ladies, very nice, I mean, really nice. Wall painting fragments. And we can see, and I hope you can see that, we see these lines which are underdrawing. This later on it has been painted over with black, but in this case the underdrawing has been made with a pen, a reed pen, in red. How do I know it's a reed pen? Because I've made all these tests and I know what marks a reed pen leaves, and you can compare that. And also for Yeah, so there. And also for different things, for instance, for a different goose in the head and also in the flowers, the little red dots that suggest flowers in the plants next to the geese, also done with a pen. So no text, nothing. However, this painter, this craftsperson, had a pen and used it. The Coffin of Nacht that I showed earlier, when we focus on these little, it has a palace facade decoration on it, and when we focus on the areas that suggest marble, red and black marble, or the veins in marble, we see the use of a pen. And we know, yeah, I had to make a reconstruction of this, so I was researching how the actual decoration has been made. And you can do a lot with a pen, other than writing, a lot. And this is then the trials before I was actually starting to make the reconstruction. Here you see a close-up of the reconstructions in the exhibition Defon now 2016. So how was this reconstruction made? I'll just go through the whole build-up of a decoration, for instance, this European coffin. We start with cedar wood, which is made from cedar, and that contains a lot of oil. That might not be so interesting, but actually it is once you start actually painting on cedar wood. Here we see trials of yellow ochre paint when it's just applied, still wet. Here it starts drying, and when it dries further, we can already see things happening, which is the interaction between the oil wood and the discoloration and more transparency of the paint layer. So this is really fascinating. What happens already during painting? So marks that we saw on the coffin. For instance, here is a white layer applied on top of this yellow layer on top of the cedar wood. Things that we see on a coffin that you might think it is because of aging or deterioration of the materials actually happened during painting. It's interesting just how things change already so quickly after making. So now I'll go quickly, because I realized that we're getting a little bit towards the end. I'll go quickly through the build-up of a reconstruction. So the wood, the yellow layer, the use of a reed pen to mark out the text bands and to mark out the hieroglyphs for the text, filling in of the hieroglyphs with Egyptian blue, and then the of the palace facade. This might be difficult, but it's a strip of yarosite, which is a different iron oxide pigment, different than the background color. Application of the white details. Again, an application of Egyptian blue, this time a different type of Egyptian blue. Application of the green. Application of application of the green, and we see the oil already leaving its marks on the wood. That's all underneath all these paint layers. And then finally the application of the red and the black and white details. And then eventually it was there, and it's now somewhere in storage in the in the museum. The same exhibition had also a they're very nice coffin set of Nespa Bershevit, 21st Dynasty coffin sets, on display, and I will quickly go through the decoration on this particular coffin. And to see this build-up of layers and the sequence of the paint sequence, we can use paint samples and examine those under the microscope. And here we see the white paste that is applied on top of linen that was on top of the wood. A tiny ornament layer. Egyptian blue is a far more coarse pigment. So we see the differences in paint layering. The ornament is a flat pigment. It has a flat crystal structure plate, so it forms a layer like this. Whereas the Egyptian blue is enormous, and we can see that in this cross section, and then eventually a varnish. This inner coffin was varnished. Here we see a section with a very, very, very busy design. A section of the lid that I reconstructed. So I started with taking over the design and examining what actually is on there. And then we start with the wood again. In this case, for the reconstruction, it was made of sycamore fig and all sorts of little pieces. We used more. We didn't reconstruct that aspect of it. Application of the linen, application of the white paste layer, and setting out of the design in red with a pen, and then application of the yellow ornament layer. Now, yellow ornament is a very, very nice pigment. We see here a rock. I also have one with me for people to see. It's in plastic, and that's for a reason, because it's also extremely toxic. It's made of arsenic. It's arsenic sulfide, and you may know arsenic from numerous Agatha Christie novels. It really is like that. You don't need a lot to be really, really ill and eventually die from it. So I had to make these reconstructions in a controlled environment and with really good protection. It is, I doubt that people in ancient Egypt knew how toxic it was. I'm sure that painters who used this a lot would have died from it if they wouldn't have suffered from other illnesses. That, is just one of the many stresses of life, I suppose, in those times. Anyway, so we apply the yellow layer, and come a little bit. I will go quickly because I realize that I'm running out of a little bit of time. A little bit focusing on the yellow layers, because it's not only ornament that has to be used for the yellow on these typical yellow coffins. There's also something else used, which is called yellow ochre. We already came to that. I also have yellow ochre with me. Completely different texture, completely different pigments. Not toxic. I mean, you can just you find it everywhere. It's iron oxide. It's the most on the earth, on the crust of the earth. Iron oxide is the most common material, and it exists in many, many colors depending on the structure. But yeah, it's not toxic, and it's been used extensively, and it's still used actually. And we see on these 21st Dynasty yellow coffins that have these, if they have these yellow layers, these yellow petals layers, we see combinations of ornament and yellow ochre, or single pigment layers, and just 3 lids from an outer coffin and 2 inner coffins. One layer where the yellow is made by a layer of ornament on top of a layer of yellow ochre, so 2 layers. Another one has it actually mixed with each other, which is mixing paint is not that common. I haven't found it that much, but it does occur. And another mixture of ornaments with calcium carbonate and yellow ochre, which gives a much more opaque layer. I will pass on this. So here we see a paint fragment. Before I used it for making cross sections, where you see these really nice ornamental particles again, and a reconstruction of a single pigment layer, just as a layer. And if you then compare that, so we take it out of this whole decoration, this whole layer structure, we just focus on the yellow layers, we see how different, and you actually have to have the actual panels in front of you to see how different it works. So on top left is just a yellow ochre layer on top of the white paste, and top right is the ornament on top of the white paste, and on the bottom you see the combination of an ornament layer on top of a yellow ochre layer, and it all works different. It has a different effect, different texture. So it's really interesting to research. Here we see the section on the actual lid and the reconstruction that shows the whole build-up. And all the way to the right, I'm not sure if you can see that, all the way to the right, the reconstruction is varnished, because varnish is also something very common, especially in for this type of objects. We find a lot of varnish on these objects, and in my research I do find a relationship between these yellow layers and the varnish. I can't go into that right now, but the varnish is not a technical layer, in my view, in my opinion. It is really part of the whole build-up and the whole sequence of materials and decoration on these type of coffins. The varnish is, from what we know, primarily made from one material, mastix, which is the resin from a pistachia tree. And here we see a little bit of that in the Pharmacy Museum in Basel. This varnish has been, mastic varnish, has been used up till the 16th century as a picture varnish on panel paintings, on easel paintings, on whatever objects. But in order to use it as a picture varnish, or as a varnish as such, you need to dilute or dissolve the resin in a solvent, or in something that makes it workable, and workable as a varnish. However, for ancient Egyptian objects, the analysis of the varnishes, we don't find any additives, it's just the mastic resin. And we think, or we actually know for quite certain, that this resin has been heated in order to make it more liquid, in order to be able to use it as a varnish. And here you see a very quiet photo of the application of the varnish and the heating of the varnish, of the resin, heating of the mastic resin on an open fire, a hot plate. I hope you can ever experience making a varnish and applying a varnish, because it's not that easy. It's very, very sticky. It's not that easy to apply at all. Yet these gigantic coffins and even wall painting and whatever, we find this varnish on many, many objects. I found that I needed to use a lot of things. A lot of additional, in order to use the varnish and to make it work. So this is still part of my current research. How does varnish work, and how does manipulation of pigments source material, paint source material work in general. Another aspect of my current research with experimental archaeology is the relief, which I haven't talked about at all. There's a lot of relief on coffins, on wood paintings and objects, either in Egyptian glue, either in as a Bastille technique, or on cartonnage, for instance. Complete different topic, but it's also part of my research. And ancient color theory, which is very much related to the yellow layers that I came to think about, came to talk about. So I wanted to thank you for your attention. And, and if you have any questions, ask them either in Italian or as hopefully somebody will be able to translate.
Avete domande, qualche curiosità? Ci sono delle domande?
What kind of analysis did you do for detect the mastics using?
So I didn't do it myself because it's not a technique that I use, but it's usually GCMS that's used. But the analysis of there are also other with FTIR you can do that too. It's the field of conservation scientists, and you're searching for deterioration products because it's not a stable material at all. It's organic material, so you're looking for deterioration products, either via GCMS or other analysis techniques that lead to the conclusion that mastics have been used, and that also can lead to the conclusion that the mastic has been heated before it was used. But it's not my field, so I do analysis myself, limited to certain techniques, and the identification of organic materials via these techniques is not my field. Yeah.
No, I just asked because I thought that you didn't take a sample from the coffin. So.
Oh yes, no. We do analyze, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
We try. Yeah.
Another question? I have a question. It's like the mastics piece from Egypt is taken from these special ones? No?
So this is an interesting question. Because the analysis of the varnishes, you're detecting deterioration products, that makes it very difficult to actually detect the location of where the mastics was sourced. The Pistachia lentiscus has many varieties, also native varieties in Egypt. We know from other written sources that mastics was imported from two places in ancient times. The islands of Chios in Greece, and the tip of the Arabian Peninsula, what is now Yemen. And the mastics that I can buy now, just to use this, comes mainly from Chios. But you're right, there are native species that for sure have been used, and also there are you can also not only from the pistachio, you can also not only get the mastic resin out, but also something that can be used as a tin lint, for instance, that can be used as a solvent. But it is technically the same material. So if that has been used as a solvent while heating to make it more spreadable, to make it more workable, it's very difficult for us now to detect that in solids of ancient varnishes. So I don't know this answer. Yeah.
Any further questions?
I didn't know anything about the Ottoman. A time ago, I read an article about Korman missionary coffins were made and of Martin Eden, and it was written that Ottoman was used from late period, since the late period, and it had a symbolic value because it looked like gold. Is it right? Did you?
Is it right? Well, we find ornaments on objects that are much earlier than late period. I mean, these 21st dynasty coffins are full with it. Shouting boxes, but also even older objects do have ornaments. The relation to how it was, how it could have been, how an ornament layer could have been perceived, and if it could have been associated with gold or other metal leaves, or with something that reflects the light or even emits light, and how that relates to the ritual of the burying ritual is something that we have also via an experiment. We have tried that with 50 volunteers in the Fitzwilliam Museum, and it was a project by Helen Strudwick and Megan Strong, who was a PhD student at the time, and I made panels that you saw, the yellow panels, for that experiment. There is absolutely a difference, and there's a difference in layers and the ornaments. Of course, the name ornament is how we call it ornament now, because from Roman times, the classical times, they called it gold pigment, outer pigment, pigmentum, outer pigmentum. So ornaments, the name relates to birds. So it's definitely an aspect that should be taken into account. Yes, absolutely. I have one fact, I have it here, and I'm not sure. Yeah, it's tiny. I couldn't bring big rocks, but I really, if you're interested, I really, you can really see it, and you can see how it has a magical. It really is magical. It's wonderful. Just don't open the box. That's all. But yeah, it's even especially with especially with little with low light levels, it reflects the light, and because it has a crystal shape that is like sheets, so it reflects the light from all different angles. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Time for last question.
I'd like to know what kind of wood was used for the brushes.
What kind of wood? Well, the fact is that I don't know of any analysis that wood analysis and wood identification that have focused on brushes. This is something that I'm very desperate to start. So I don't know. I do know from one analysis in the Petrie Museum that a date palm has been used for the fibers. And if you know of the date palm trees, they have these where the leaves come and where the leaves start from the they have all these fibers that are very long, and they form almost a textile. I use those too for brushes, but no, it's an unexplored area.
Sorry, one last question. The brushes were made only from like vegetable material, or also from animal material, like for hair?
So this is also a really good question. I base myself on the brushes that we know from collections. They are all from vegetable plant material. However, I wouldn't see why you couldn't use hair.
So we must consider that what you find in tomb might be ritual, so might not reflect exactly, because most of the material is not what they used in time. It can be it's what they put in tomb.
Absolutely. That's also why I'm expanding my research into brushes to other cultures and other areas to know a little bit more about it. What I do know, because I have tried hair brushes, what I do know is that, for instance, Egyptian blue, trying to apply Egyptian blue with an animal hair brush is impossible. It doesn't work. It just
Too thick.
It's too thick, and it's the brush just won't release the veins. It's just impossible to do. And also, you find if you look closely at painted surfaces on ancient Egyptian objects, you do find fibers from brushes. So really, the moment somebody finds an animal hair that can be related to application method, please, let me know, because it's really interesting. Because we use animal hair brushes all the time, right? So yeah, really good question.
So if you want to ask something else, you can still ask that in private. Now, I thank you again, Elsbeth, for. And see you.